People in the USA who still display a Confederate flag, why? I'm sure there are worse people, but Harvey Weinstein went from being one of the most powerful people in the world, to be completely reviled, and losing everything. This is the guy who had Meryl Streep and Oprah on speed dial, and married to a woman 1000x too attractive for him. He now uses a walker, has lost his fortune and his reputation. And his dick is literally rotting off. In case you didn't know, several of the women who accused him of sexual misconduct all pointed out that he wasn't really interested in sex, per se, he just wanted massages. According to some, his hygiene was so poor he developed an infection in his dick, which then rotted the flesh after being left untreated. He basically got gangrene on his genitals and was effectively impotent. Harvey Weinstein, film producer. At highest career point, producer of films like Pulp Fiction and Shakespeare in Love, which won 7 Academy Awards in 1998, recipient of Producers Guild of America's Milestone Award. At his daily worst, more than 24 actresses, models, and entertainment industry professionals accused Weinstein of sexual harassment and assault. Repercussions: Weinstein was fired from his own production company, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, which awards the Oscars, kicked him out. Before cultists jump down my throat, please know I merely think the topic is historically significant and I'm not making a political statement here. I would really like to see a long-form History Channel-esque documentary series about Donald Trump's 2020, because it fascinates me so much how he could start that year with everyone thinking he had the election in the bag and then, by August, have everyone thinking Biden, the guy that even Democrats mocked mercilessly, was going to obliterate him. Now that is a fall from grace. Whether you like him or not, you can't deny it's one of the most epic fumbles in the history of American politics. The guy went from Thanos to President Scrub in a matter of months. Not the biggest in human history but probably the biggest in wrestling history, Chris Benoit. Man was considered one of, if not, the best technical wrestler in the business, was one of the few WCW guys to make it big in the WWE, most of his matches could be considered absolute classics. I know this is all current and all, but J.K. Rowling absolutely is up there. She's gone from being one of the most beloved authors and even celebrities of all time, especially within the LGBT community, to the most hated. Her biggest community has become her biggest source of hate. Her book series and the franchise was one of the biggest and golden-coded series of all time that faced little criticism. Outside of religious reasons, it was like everyone just adored it. But now it's slowly being picked apart into a mess. It's enough to give you whiplash, how fast this has all happened. Ravi Zacharias, https://en. Wikipedia. org/wiki/Ravi_Zacharias. My grandparents were uber religious and grandpa always had Christian radio on. I mean, at all waking hours. I've never 100% agreed with those views and had contempt for organized religion, so I found it constantly annoying. That said, I didn't mind listening to Ravi Zacharias. He was a good storyteller. After he died, a lot of really ugly things came to light. Even though I haven't considered myself a Christian for a long time, I admit the whole thing broke my heart. The whole situation is devastating. Thomas Edison. Not to say that he wasn't important, but for a long time he was touted as the greatest innovator/inventor. In more recent years, there has been a push of revisionist perspective that almost all of his inventions actually came from his staff, who have mostly been forgotten by history and non-disclosure agreements. Slapping his name on patents created by people below him shaped a narrative that he alone created these inventions. Plus, people look differently now on his cutthroat practices of business, the rivalry between Tesla and, of course, Topsy. So maybe not a fall from grace but more of a recontextualization. A cross between P.T. Barnum/Henry Ford, maybe. But not Leonardo da Vinci. Tiger Woods in 2009. He was probably the best athlete in the world at the time, definitely the highest paid, but in reality he was banging everything, had a sex addiction, was addicted to working out, on many painkillers and sleeping tablets for insomnia. He was also training with the Navy SEALs for a while too, which is bizarre, said to his coach and caddy a few times that he wanted to quit golf and join the Navy SEALs, he was too old. So it all blew up very dramatically, with lurid details being released over the next few months, and he was subsequently injured on and off for pretty much the next decade, except 2013 to 14, and then came back to win the Masters. So he tumbled from grace and picked himself back up. Giuliani. From America's mayor after September 11 to a grotesque old drunk shilling election lies at the Four Seasons landscaping next to a dildo shop, suspended from even practicing law in the city he once governed. They used to show him at every Yankees game he attended receiving applause from the fans. Now he's the butt of more jokes than anyone in politics besides Trump, with unforgettable moments like dripping sweaty hair dye down his face on national TV and getting caught in the act of attempted pedophilia by Borat. Alan Turing. Granted, his fall from grace was not caused by himself but from narrow-minded bullshit. So, Alan Turing, father of theoretical computer science and AI. Crucial to the overall success of WW2. Invented so much, considered a genius. But, he was gay. So in 1952 he is prosecuted for homosexual acts, and he could choose prison or chemical castration. He chose chemical castration. 2 years later, before his birthday, he kills himself with cyanide. In the 2000s he was posthumously pardoned, but it feels barely adequate for how shamefully he was treated by the country he had helped save. Alan Turing. https://en. m. Wikipedia. org/wiki/Alan_Turing. Movie on him, https://en. m. Wikipedia. org/wiki/the_imitation_game. TLDR, he was a gay man who was estimated to have shortened WW2 by 2 years by cracking the German encryption they used for naval communication. After the war he also built one of the first stored program computers. However, in 1952 he was prosecuted for homosexual acts and was chemically castrated. It really wasn't okay to be gay back in the day, and he died by cyanide poisoning, either by suicide or accident. In 2009 he was granted a pardon. Half a century after he died, of course. Aaron Burr, he was Vice President of the United States when he shot and killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel. The duel killed Burr's political career. He was dropped from Thomas Jefferson's ticket in the 1804 election, and he couldn't even win an election for governor of New York. In 1805, Burr plotted to invade Spanish territories and create his own empire, with a side plot to incite a revolution against the United States. In 1807, Burr was put on trial for treason, and he narrowly escaped a conviction. Uniden. Copied from another post about Uniden. Reddit user Uniden was a doctoral candidate who was ridiculously active on Reddit. Wherever there was a biology/ecology question, that guy would get called in and answer. Because of this and his personality, he was very well liked here, to the point where he has a museum of Reddit entry. He because quite Reddit famous. Then over a post about jackdaws he was caught vote manipulating on alternate accounts. Upvoting his own submissions, downvoting people he disagreed with, etc. Then from there it was a rapid fall into obscurity. Vidkun Quisling. He went from being a hero who first was a close collaborator of the explorer Fridtjof Nansen and then helped organize humanitarian relief during the Russian famine of 1921 while working as a Norwegian diplomat to the Soviet Union, while also handling British foreign relations before they formally established them with the USSR, to being executed by Norway for treason and assisting in the Holocaust while acting as the leader of Norway's puppet government installed by the Nazis. His last name is now a synonym for traitor, much like Benedict Arnold. Henry VIII. He was a really cool kid with a lot of potential to be a great man. Then, his big brother died and he was suddenly next in line for the throne. He was a bit of a brat, which was fine for second son, but as a king, his penis did his thinking for him. He was actually quite a successful musician, too. He wrote a really neat tune called Pastime with Pleasant Company or something that's really nice. Anyway, everyone only ever remembers him for spilting from the RCC and killing/divorcing his wives. Honestly, do some research on Henry before he was king. Bill Cosby went from America's dad to convicted serial rapist. If he hadn't ruined his brand, his 60s comedy records would be considered classics. His kids' shows always offered a positive message. The Cosby Show presented the model black family. Then, one accuser after another came forward, recalling really heinous druggings and rapes. Not one, not two, so many. Cosby has never shown a shred of remorse. He tries to portray himself as a victim. Screw him, may he rot in jail, and pay out all his money in damages. The Emperor Caligula, the son of the fallen hero Germanicus and descendant of Mark Antony and Marcus Agrippa, his ascendancy in 37 AD, was seen as vindication of his father, especially given that he succeeded the old and corrupt Tiberius, who had been widely suspected of being implicated in the man's death. He was thought to be proud, brave, and beneficent, with the same youthful bravado as Augustus. 4 years later, the man lay dead, slaughtered by his guards. He is now one of history's most despised figures, after making his brief rule among the most brutal in Roman history. Ellen. She was known for years for her kindness or supposed kindness. Then all of these rumors started to come out that she was a pretty terrible person to work with. Then those rumors turned out to be true. I was a huge Ellen fan for so long. I remember when she came out on national television and that was such a huge deal, and I remember the next day one of my close friends told me she was gay. And I remember her saying she felt Oklahoma to say that because of Ellen. But in my opinion I want to had a huge falling from grace for how she treated people. And it's really sad and it's upsetting. Bill Cosby comes to mind. When I was growing up, United States, in the 1970s and 1980s, he was everyone's favorite comedian. My parents had his comedy albums, and I would listen to them over and over. They were hysterical and considered comedy classics. He had TV shows and appeared in TV commercials for Jell-O. He was smart, funny and clever and beloved. And then the rumors started, and then the official accusations. It took a long time, but when it happened, it was like a long string of dominoes falling down. Now he's gone. He's still alive, but for all practical purposes, he's gone. Hockey. Adolf Hitler. Although history has made it clear his ascension was nothing but Machiavellian, he led Germany to the cusp of being the greatest power in Europe. He started as a decorated soldier of the First World War. His imprisonment led to the authorship of a hugely successful book. He managed to install himself as the leader of historic country and national hero without an outright revolution. He then created the most powerful industrialized military of the era, with cutting-edge technology. The initial victories of the Wehrmacht were staggering, and the major world powers were stunned. He killed himself, his wife and his dog hiding in a bunker as his capital city all but burnt to the ground. Okay, it's not all-time history, but this past year has anyone's opinion on Elon Musk improved? His personal life as a lousy father was exposed, and he's shown to be the biggest asshole mini-dictator with his takeover of Twitter. Even if you hate Twitter like I do, it's impossible to root for a billionaire firing and picking on just regular employees there. I see many electric car discussions where even though Tesla still makes one of the best vehicles that people don't even want it just out of spite of Elon Musk. Benedict Arnold. Hero General of the American Revolution. One of George Washington's best assets. Felt slighted and overlooked by his contemporaries. Switched sides to the British, made no difference to the war effort. Died in disgrace in England. His name is now a synonym for traitor. Edit. Since this is getting some attention, for anyone interested in learning more about the man, I highly recommend watching Benedict Arnold, A Question of Honor, a TV movie from 2003. Starring Aidan Quinn as Arnold and Kelsey Grammer as Washington. Trump. Regardless of your political perspective, he represented winner. Before his TV show he was known as rich and successful. His TV show made him a ubiquitous symbol of the successful boss. He even walked into the presidency and won it, basically as a random citizen. Now he represents loser. He couldn't admit he lost the presidency, and is now basically QAnon, which are the biggest losers on the planet. If he had accepted defeat and supported his party, which he had won ownership of, he could probably have constructed a Republican majority and won the presidency again in 4 years. Instead, he exposed himself so thoroughly that he destroyed any legacy, not only as president, but as a private citizen. Trump by the left. For 40 years they adored him. They put him in their movies and TV shows. They interviewed him constantly on their news programs and talk shows. They referred to him as an expert on finance and foreign policy. They covered up his sexual escapades, including "grabbed them by the." J.K. Rowling. Edit, somehow I'm getting a lot of hate on this post. J.K. has a lot of haters due to what she's done in the past few years, and I'm very conflicted on all of it. I'm not expressing any of my own opinion in saying this. She has definitively fallen from grace though, and here is a thread so you can read other people's comments on it. Again, I have not taken either side. https://www. reddit.com/r/cmv_cmv_cmv_cmv_amount_cmv_doesn't_deserve_the_source equals share and UTM_medium equals iOS_app and UTM_name equals iOSMF. Lucifer. Isaiah 14 verses 12 to 17 KJV. 12. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? 13. For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation, in the sides of the north. 14. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High. 15. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. 16. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee, and consider thee, saying, Is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms? 17. That made the world as a wilderness, and destroyed the cities thereof, that opened not the house of his prisoners? I think we are watching the biggest fall of our lifetime with Donald Trump, playing out every single day. Ultra-wealthy businessman who was a Democrat his entire life, until he ran for office as a Republican. I will not be at all surprised if he is barred from holding office, despite his announcement of his candidacy. I would also not be one bit surprised if he landed in jail for a time. He went from being president to leading an insurrection against the country he was in charge of, but admittedly about to lose power. Kanye West. Developed an entire sample style and influenced a whole generation of rappers, through his own music provided intricate expressions of the black experience in the U.S. Only to fall from grace due to his battle with mental illness and the hidden racism he kept within. Now being rejected by the people who loved him most. I would like to clarify that his mental illness is not the origin of his anti-Semitism but rather influenced his inability towards proper decision-making and ability of self-reflection. Bipolar disorder is a complex mental illness that does not justify anyone's racism and prejudice towards another. However, can cause serious cognitive impairment for lengths of time and one's ability to recognize how their actions affect others. This is Reddit, so in Reddit history it would be Elon Musk. Not long ago, if you posted something as simple as a pic of a wrecked Tesla, downvotes would flow. People would assume you were an Elon hater, had an agenda, accuse you of wanting to destroy the planet because you were opposing the Messiah Elon. All this from a pic, or maybe just saying quality control on the cars was a little weak. Within years all self-driven cars would be illegal, fleets of automated Teslas would circle your neighborhood waiting to give you a ride. Traffic accidents would only happen if stubborn people tried to drive themselves, and so on. Not the biggest but worth mentioning is Mayor Rudy Giuliani. After cleaning up NYC from the mob and the filth of the early 90s, he was insanely popular. People forget what NYC looked like in the 90s, prostitutes and peep shows riddled Times Square. Then after September 11th he became America's mayor. It was rumored he could have been president except for some skeletons from his prosecution days against the mob. Today we know him from Borat 2, weirdly over supporting Trump, like more than any other politician, and hair dye dripping down his face. Not the biggest fall from grace but an important one. Jack Ryan was running for the Illinois Senate seat in 2004 for the Republican Party. Ryan was slated to be the next Republican star, maybe if he the Senate seat. But the court records about his divorce to actress Jeri Ryan were unsealed by the court, and it revealed that Jack was into forcing his wife to have sex in public places and with other people. Ryan had to withdraw from the race. The Republican candidate lost to the Democratic candidate Barack Obama. The rest is history. TLDR, Republican candidate gets exposed for being too kinky, and as a result Barack Obama is the President of the United States. Sergio Moro. A Brazilian federal judge who oversaw the biggest corruption trial in Brazilian history and convicted former president, now president-elect, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva to jail, which prevented him from participating in the 2018 election, which got far-right Jair Bolsonaro elected. 1 year later, someone hacked his private messages and revealed he had colluded with the prosecutors on Lula's case to convict him. Lula's sentence was then voided by the Brazilian Supreme Court, which declared the former judge biased against Lula. Fast forward to 2022 and Lula, now eligible to run, defeats President Jair Bolsonaro on the presidential election. It's rare to see history punish someone as evil as Moro as swiftly as it did. Harvey Weinstein. Halal Ben Shakir, aka Lucifer, son of the morning. As far as humans go, I would say the biggest fall from grace would have to have been the Roman Emperor Nero. When he came to power upon the death of the Emperor Claudius, he had a full treasury, loyal legions, and the absolute love of both Senate and people of Rome. Ennatus P. Opulus Q. Uer. Ominous. He was looked upon as a breath of fresh air, expected to take the empire to new heights. By the end of his life, he was blamed for the Great Fire of Rome, his persecution of the Christians was wearing thin, Judea was in full revolt, and the Senate and people had declared him a public enemy. Donald Trump. Sex crimes, slumlord, tax fraud, walking in women's changing rooms unannounced, election fraud and related crimes in Fulton County, Georgia, one offense relating to potential wire fraud stemming from fraudulent representations made to solicit PAC contributions after the 2020 election, one perjury offense relating to Trump's legal efforts to overturn the 2020 election, and 3 offenses relating to Trump's unlawful possession of government records at Mar-a-Lago. He is working on a 3rd impeachment trifecta as we speak. Anne Boleyn. Henry VIII literally moved heaven and earth to be with her. She made a lot of enemies coming up. Who couldn't wait to tear her down? Charged with treason, incest and adultery. She literally was thrown to the wolves, convicted and executed. Thomas Cromwell. Son of a blacksmith. Managed to rise to the nobility just on his skills alone. But again made an enemy of the old nobility because he was a commoner. Was literally Henry VIII's right-hand man and made the early years of his reign more bearable for others. Before eventually falling from grace and being beheaded. It's telling though that Thomas Cromwell is the only one that the old tyrant actually regretted executing. Oddly enough, Adolf Hitler was a decorated and very brave soldier during World War I, and was greatly admired for his bravery and leadership ability. Then his rise to power began, and after that, he became one of the most awful monsters the world has ever known. If he had died during World War I, he would have been regarded by both sides as a brave and talented soldier, and nobody would ever have suspected that he had the potential to become a monster. This often worries me, because I know there are some people out there who are somewhere in the process of becoming monsters, and I hope they fail to do so. My opinion would be Marilyn Monroe. She was just as badly publicized as Britney Spears. Medical professionals were not addressing her BPD. I assume the DSM was massively off, and she suffered as a person with BPD would, self-destructive and suicidal behaviors, splitting, and engaging in taboo nature, as she wrote in her journal. Everyone just labeled her crazy, took it as bait. She was an icon, a beautiful, charismatic one at that, and floored everyone. But had a mysterious sickness which ended her life. I'd say Ronald Reagan, but that would depend on who you asked. When I was a kid he was my favorite president because he seemed like such a genuine kind soul, with being a commentator for Iowa State football and an actor. I remember being really heartbroken watching his funeral on TV even. Fast forward to now and I'm 27 and now know that he's a monster and always has been. This coming from a moderate on the political spectrum. I suppose putting crack in the ghetto isn't exactly a bipartisan issue, but the way he was presented to a young kid was. Christopher Columbus got lost, thought he found a shortcut to India, turns out he stumbled upon the Bahamas and called the people living there Indians, which they were obviously not. Never set foot in what is now the United States. Federal holiday in the United States will likely end it in our lifetime. Went from celebrated hero to a villain to many people, not just the indigenous peoples of the Americas. It's like sending my kid KFC and he found out there is a new McDonald's on the other side of town. Roman Emperor Caligula. He was hailed as a hero when he first came to power. The son of the popular Germanicus and inheriting from the hated Tiberius, he appeared to be the savior the empire needed. In his first few months he was beloved by the public and placated the military. As time went by he sent the empire spiraling into debt. He may have poisoned his wife, he had family members killed. He became more and more mad and cruel, murdering people in wild ways and partaking in crazy sexual acts. Ultimately he became one of the most loathed empires of all time and left the empire in a much worse state than when he inherited it. Anthony Weiner is a good example. Had a strong political career, an attractive successful wife and a young son. Got caught sexting with a young girl, sent a photo of himself in his underwear while next to his kid, making it all worse. And this was while he was attempting a comeback after the previous scandal involving the same behavior. He was well liked enough where he had a chance at regaining some of his career and life. Blew it for good, and is a sex offender having lost it all. Word in NYC was he may have been able to run for prez in the future had he not wrecked his life. Definitely not the biggest, but Conor McGregor for me is such a fall from grace. I already liked UFC and MMA, but he fully made me immersed into the sport. I absolutely loved the bloke. Having an Irish side of the family too only made me even more keen on him. Then his ability was just unmatched, just like his personality. Then came the Mayweather fight. He ruined his fluid karate stance with a stiff boxing stance that killed him as a fighter. Then he became a drunk who would fight old men and make ridiculous excuses. Then the whole Jolie Poirier business in their trilogy bout, just got no respect for him anymore. Laugh at his tweets and Instagram posts. Such a sad sight to see from a man I truly had excitement for. Not the biggest fall, but Charles Lindbergh deserves to be in the conversation. After making the historic first solo transatlantic flight, and gaining the sympathy of many after the kidnapping and murder of his son, he promoted American neutrality in World War II. Though he reversed his stance after the attack on Pearl Harbor, many had already branded him a Nazi sympathizer. He eventually did rehabilitate his image, but after his death, it came out that he had 3 separate secret families throughout Europe. So I guess it's a mixed legacy at best. Jesus of Nazareth. Per the Gospel narratives, in less than a week he went from being publicly lauded in a regal procession to the Temple of Jerusalem, hailed as the prophesied liberator of the nation, to being murdered and tortured by the state to the assent of a jeering mob. You don't have to be religious to believe that this much happened. Virtually all scholars, https://en. Wikipedia. org/wiki/historicity_of_Jesus, assent that Jesus was a real, historical Jewish person who was crucified by the Romans. Most of y'all never heard of him, but if you're in the gotcha fandom, you DFF know who this is. Len totally. Dude went from known for his gotcha animations being extra smooth to known for sexting a 14-year-old girl. Speaking of gotcha, I heard the game's creator, Lucas, or Looney/Lunheim, is also a bad person. He's a pedo, made offensive jokes, his sister isn't a real person, etc. Maybe that's why the games aren't getting updated. Also, just to be clear, the games aren't bad. The community is just ruining its reputation of the content the community makes. Rolf Harris, he used to be a really well-known and celebrated children's entertainer and comedian who made songs that classmates at my school used to sing all the time. Then he was outed as a pedophile and arrested for 5 years for indecent assault, and now no one will touch him with a barge pole. Same with Fred Talbot, who was a really beloved weatherman who worked for Granada and This Morning in the UK, known for the way he used to present on top of a floating map on the Liverpool docks to describe the weather. Then he too was exposed as a pedophile during Operation U-Tree and sentenced to 5 years in prison for indecent sexual assault with young kids. I mean, Benito Mussolini comes to mind. He was widely popular among Italians ahead of his ascension to power and during his early terms in office, even more popular than the likes Franco and Hitler, who stole much of his leadership style on their own run-ups to power. In the end he was shot, executed, and his body dumped naked in the street, kicked, spat on, urinated on, had fecal matter thrown at him, before ultimately being hung upside down from a gas station, where he was then stoned by the public for several days before his body was discarded. At one point he was regarded as a legend and hero by the people. In the end, his body was desecrated entirely by those same people. Doesn't get much worse than that. Tommy Morrison. Morrison was an American professional boxer who competed from 1988 to 2008, and held the WBO heavyweight title in 1993. He retired from boxing in 1996 when he tested positive for HIV. Morrison played Tommy Gunn in Rocky V, was due to fight Mike Tyson, punched harder than Lennox Lewis and even beat George Foreman, but tragically died at just 44. He could have been amazing if he wouldn't have been so damn good looking. Women loved him and he loved a lot of women. Sad how his career vanished before his eyes. The Nixon Presidency. Read All the President's Men by Woodward and Bernstein, the actual Washington Post reporters who uncovered it all. I lived through it and this is the best and most accurate account. This book will stay with you forever and you will better learn about our democracy. Please take the time to read this book. It's amazing. What a trip you will take, and this is real American history that reporters and journalists are not afraid to tell. Please read it. Many years from now you'll be very glad you did. Richard III. Well-respected war hero, loved by his people as he cared about small matters when he was Duke of Gloucester, incredibly loyal to his brother the king and showed no sign of disloyalty or agenda. After his brother Edward IV died, he took over control of his nephews, one being the new King Edward V, and locked them in the Tower of London, where they then disappeared. Madd's rebellion was caused due to no one trusting the king since he had killed the heir to the throne and crowned himself king. Lost the throne to Henry VII and was exec. Bruno. He was a goalkeeper for Flamengo in the late 2000s. Great player, young, scored a few goals of free kick and penalties, loved by everyone, was probably going to play in Europe and had good chances of one day being at Brazilian NT. Then his lover, he was married, got pregnant and asked for child support. So he asked a few friends to kill her and they did it, later feeding her to the dogs. But the boy was actually born and says he is afraid of ever meeting his dad, who got already released, and I think he plays for an insignificant club somewhere, I think here in Rio even. Another one is Robinho. Played at World Cup for Brazil, idol, great player. If he ever sets foot in Italy again he will be arrested on account for group rape. Mark Antony. He went from the being Caesar's right-hand man, to the victor of Philippi and master of the Roman world. Octavian did control half, but Antony had the rich and interesting half, and also de facto took over Egypt before Rome formally annexed it. To botching his own suicide as his supporters abandoned him and some kid of no personal accomplishments taking it all from him. He could have been master of all the Mediterranean, instead he's one of history's most famous second-place finishers. He's also widely remembered as a hedonist and effeminate party guy now, despite his decades of military success. Pierre and Jeanne d'Arc, two of Jeanne d'Arc's brothers who fought in the 100 Years' War during her campaign against the English. After her execution by the English they started traveling through France with a young woman named Jeanne d'Armoises, pretending she was their sister in order to scam her many admirers for money and gifts over the course of 6 years, including at least one princess. This ended when they met Charles VII and Armoises couldn't tell him a secret that the real Jeanne had told him and she confessed to her crimes. We don't know how the two brothers died or when, but I can't imagine being such a piece of shit that you use your executed sister who would one day end up canonized as a saint for a get-rich-quick scheme. Sam Bankman-Fried's fall has been both impressive and sudden. The story isn't nearly over, but that was one hell of a Ponzi scheme he created. I listen to news updates on Google Home and I think it's Reuters that's sponsored by EY, and they always have some expert from their firm dole out a tiny amount of advice as a baited hook. Until last week they were saying how employees wanted their organizations to engage in crypto, a weird claim in itself, and how they were experts and ready to help. Suddenly they ain't running that intro any longer. There's one going on as we speak, that first came to attention here on Reddit. Not that he really deserved the grace in the first place, but Rudy Giuliani went from America's mayor, who accrued a bunch of goodwill by coincidence of him being the mayor of New York on September 11th, to being a disgraced, disbarred lawyer that tried to steal the last presidential election for Donald Trump. He could have literally done nothing else in his career after 2001 and would have been seen as a respectable figure. Now he's known as the far-right sycophant who oozes black goo and booked Four Seasons Total Landscaping to concede the 2020 election. Lance Armstrong. Little story, I took French A-level in the UK in 2011, I think. The reading section was 2 A4 pages talking about all his achievements. The booklet had to have a piece of paper added to the front of it stating that this article has been written before the recent developments in his doping had come to light, big news topic in the recent weeks, and to only use the information in the article to answer the questions. Thought it was a very confusing way to start an exam. Why not just change it? Joe Paterno, lovingly known as Joepa by students and players for decades as he coached the Penn State Littrany Lions. Widely regarded as the face of the university and hailed as one of the great coaches of college football. His fall from grace came when it was found out that his longtime best friend loved to have sex with children, and Joe Paterno knew about and allowed it to happen at the college football training facility. He literally died of the shame months later. Good riddance, you disgusting coward of a man. Alexander Villaplane. From captaining France in the inaugural World Cup to being gunned down by a firing squad 15 years later for conspiring with the Nazis, torturing an immeasurable number of people. The judge who sentenced him said of him, "They left fire and ruin in their wake." A witness told us how he saw with his own eyes these mercenaries take jewels from the still twitching and blood-stained bodies of their victims. Villaplane was in the midst of all this, calm and smiling. Cheerful, almost invigorated. Gotta say Louis C.K. loved the man's comedy during the mid-aughts 2010s, and his show Louis was brilliant, emo. I'll still watch his comedy specials, but something is just tainted about it all now. I know he admitted to what he did and seemed remorseful at the time, but in recent months when he was on his press tour for his new movie, he had this slight victim complex/avoidance about him that leaves a bad taste in my mouth. He truly could have gone down as one of the greatest living comedians. His crimes to me dilute the essence of his comedy. It was imperative to the comedy that the man saying these awful but truthful things was a fairly upstanding person. It's not the same anymore. The Government of Canada legalizing medical assistance in dying for mentally ill people in March 2023, when there's a huge number of impoverished disabled people due to the lack of funds and supports. Also, there's a huge housing crisis. This means that the disabled community will have no choice but to choose MAID. This means that Canada is going to enact a genocide based in eugenics. The whole government passed this, all political parties passed on this. So, yeah, that's how little the Canadian government cares about its citizens. Milan Nedic and Costa Pekanak and Milan Stojadinovic are who I think qualify for this in Serbia. Nedic was a general and then became head of the puppet gov. Some say he is a traitor, some say he did it to save Serbs. Pekanak was one of the old Setnik leaders, WW1 and pre-WW1. In WW2, instead of being the Yugoslav army in the fatherland Setniks, Ravna Gora Setniks, he made his own group and was a traitor and a Nazi German supporter. Milan Stojadinovic was truly the best Yugoslav and Serb economist. But he was kinda a fascist but fled to Argentina. Some say he was forced to. After he was deposed BCS, he was kinda a fascist and tried to make deals. A stupid gov came later. He also made a deal with Pavelic in Argentina, although what was his opinion on him? Danny Masterson was an actor I grew up looking at on TV, being a huge fan of 70s show. This whole group was the foundation for me of what chilling is today. Recently I've been watching The Ranch and finding myself falling back in love with those actors that I would fall asleep watching at the end of a day when I was a young girl. Then something happened, I will not say what, but for some reason Danny Masterson, playing Rooster, was written out of the show. I couldn't believe it, I had to Google it. Turned out that 3 rape allegations were made against him. After reading articles on it, I still can't believe it, but even if he's pleading not guilty, it seems like he is. No matter the result of the trial, reading a bit more on his personal life broke a part of my childhood. Beau Brummel, who went from being a commoner to the closest favorite of the Prince Regent/future King George IV. His wit and character was lauded and his personal style copied endlessly, with his taste becoming the loose blueprint for much of men's fashion ever since. He took his acquired position for granted perhaps and offended the king, causing not only his exile from popular society, but also from the United Kingdom. In his exile, he died prematurely, in debt and insane from syphilis in a cold asylum in France. Not the biggest but one that isn't talked about much anymore was Errol Flynn. One of the great actors of the 30s and 40s, rapist, pedophile, drug smuggler, allegedly, best buddy of L.R. Hubbard, Nazi spy, probably, Japanese spy, also probably. His house was full of Big Brother-style hidden voyeur viewing areas. Just all around a crazy guy. The more you read about him the weirder it gets. We'll never know how much was true, and he's still considered somewhat of a national treasure for Australia, but his life story is so bizarre it's hard to ignore. Rudy Giuliani. Can't believe I haven't seen this one here. He made his name by going after organized crime bosses and propelled that into a political career. He was widely regarded as having cleaned up NYC. Then came 9/11 and he handled it with grace and strong leadership. Like him or hate him, he was respected and had integrity. I don't give him a pass, far from it, but I honestly think he has lost his mind. Literally. Like I think he is mentally ill and no one in his family wants to do anything to stop it. Jimmy Savile, who was a pedophile and a rapist. Fuck him. Bill Cosby, who was a rapist. It's hard to say it because I don't want it to be true, but fuck him too. Tech 9, the battle rapper. Used to be highly regarded, although not one of the greatest, but definitely a pioneer. One day news broke that he killed himself and a ton of people, fans and rappers in the community were devastated. A couple days later, it came out that he had CP and sexually assaulted a child. Killed himself. He no longer exists to us. And no, this is not Tech 9, from KC. 2 different people. Fuck Tech 9.